Clara was a quiet, unassuming woman who worked as a cleaning lady in a tall office building. Her job was often unnoticed by the busy executives who ran the place, rushing from meeting to meeting with little care for the people who kept the offices clean and tidy. Every day, Clara arrived early and left late, sweeping, mopping, and wiping down desks, all while quietly observing the comings and goings of the people around her. The building housed a lot of high-powered professionals, especially the CEO, Mr. Thompson. He was a man who carried an air of arrogance, as if the entire world should bow to his every command. His office was at the top of the building, a large, impressive space with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave him a clear view of the city. Clara had seen him enter and leave his office countless times, always in a rush, always talking about important matters with his colleagues. But to Clara, he was just another person passing through her day. Little did anyone know, Clara had a story of her own, one they would never expect. The other workers often mocked Clara, thinking she was nothing more than the lady who cleaned their messes. They would laugh behind her back, cracking jokes about her appearance, her uniform, and the fact that she was, in their eyes, just a cleaner. Clara never reacted. She didn't mind. In fact, she had grown used to it over the years. It was not unusual for people in positions of power to dismiss her, and she had learned to ignore their taunts. But despite the mocking and the whispers, Clara remained calm and collected, focused on her work. One day, while she was cleaning Mr. Thompson's office, Clara overheard something interesting. The CEO was having a conversation with a few of his executives, and as they spoke, they revealed something that made Clara's ears perk up. They were discussing a major contract, a deal that could bring in millions for the company. But as they talked, Clara realized something was off. The deal wasn't as straightforward as it seemed, and the CEO and his team were planning to take credit for a project that wasn't theirs. They were using others' work to climb higher in the corporate world. Clara didn't speak a word, not even when she finished cleaning the office and prepared to leave. She simply took a mental note of everything she had heard. The wheels in her mind began to turn. She was no fool, and though the executives saw her as just a cleaner, she had a sharp mind. Clara wasn't just any ordinary cleaning lady. She had once worked in corporate strategy before life had taken her down a different path. She had worked with high-level executives before, seen their tactics, understood the language of business. And now, Clara was in a unique position. She knew things that no one else did. She quietly went about her tasks for the next few weeks, collecting information piece by piece. Every day, she heard more whispers, more details. She started to understand the inner workings of the company better than anyone could have imagined. And though she still wore the uniform of a cleaning lady, Clara knew her time had come. She was no longer just cleaning floors. She was preparing for something much bigger, something that would change everything. As Clara continued her work, the executive's dismissive laughter faded into the background. She had a plan, and the moment to put it into action would come sooner than they thought. She was ready to show them that nothing, not even the highest walls of a corporate office, could hide the truth forever. For weeks, Clara continued with her usual routine, cleaning the same offices and walking through the same hallways, but with a new sense of purpose. She kept to herself, never letting on that she was anything other than the quiet cleaning lady everyone had come to ignore. But her eyes and ears were always alert. Each day, she heard more conversations, more bits of information, and more clues about the shady business dealings happening behind closed doors. The CEO, Mr. Thompson, and his executives thought they could get away with it. But Clara was catching on to their schemes, one small detail at a time. The office workers had no idea that Clara had been listening to their private discussions. The way they spoke so openly about their plans was like they didn't care who heard them. They mocked their clients, lied about their projects, and spoke about other employees as if they were nothing more than tools to be used. To Clara, it was all too familiar. She had seen it before in her past job. The way powerful people would take credit for work they didn't do. The way they'd manipulate the system to climb higher. She knew that Mr. Thompson, the CEO, was the ringleader. He was the one who stood at the top of it all, pulling the strings. His arrogance was evident in everything he did. He treated others as though they were beneath him, often talking down to people in the office. But Clara noticed something else about him, something that intrigued her. He was careful, calculated, and never left anything to chance. Yet, despite his outward confidence, Clara sensed a certain vulnerability underneath. It was as if he had more to hide than anyone could imagine. One afternoon, Clara overheard a particularly revealing conversation. She was quietly dusting the hallway when Mr. Thompson and one of the senior managers, Richard, walked by, talking about an upcoming presentation to the board. They were discussing how to present a project that wasn't theirs, a project they had taken from another team. Clara had heard rumors about this project before, but hearing it directly from Mr. Thompson's mouth confirmed everything. They were planning to take full credit for the hard work of others, and they had no intentions of giving anyone else the credit they deserved. The moment Clara heard this, she knew she had to act fast. She had always been quiet, never drawing attention to herself, but this time she couldn't just stand by. The actions of Mr. Thompson and his team were not just unethical, they were downright dishonest. And Clara wasn't the type of person to let injustice slide, especially when she had the power to do something about it. As Clara continued to clean the office spaces and interact with the staff, she quietly observed their behaviors, taking note of their weaknesses. She realized that many of the executives were careless in their actions, making mistakes that could be easily traced back to them. The more Clara thought about it, the more she began to form a plan. She wasn't going to let Mr. Thompson get away with his lies and deceit. She would gather the evidence, expose the truth, and show everyone just how wrong they were to underestimate her. With each passing day, Clara's resolve grew stronger. She wasn't just a cleaning lady anymore. She was someone with a purpose. The time was coming, and when it arrived, no one would see her coming. They would finally realize just how much power one quiet, underestimated person could have when they decided to stand up for what was right. Clara had always been a woman of few words, preferring to observe rather than speak. She wasn't one to draw attention to herself, and for the most part, she was invisible to the people around her. But beneath her quiet exterior, Clara had always been sharp and observant. She knew how to read people, how to listen carefully without seeming like she was paying attention. This made her a great cleaner, but it also made her a keen observer of everything happening in the office around her. Over the past few weeks, as Clara continued her routine, she began to piece together a picture of what was truly going on within the company. She was no longer just cleaning the same floors and wiping down the same desks. She was becoming a quiet investigator, taking note of the smallest details that the executives thought were insignificant. It was in these small moments that Clara began to see the truth of what was happening in the company, and she was beginning to realize just how deep the corruption ran. The more she listened, the more Clara began to understand the complex network of deceit. She had overheard enough to know that the CEO, Mr. Thompson, was leading a team of executives who were using dishonest tactics to further their own interests. They had been involved in several shady deals, manipulating people and processes to make themselves richer and more powerful. But what really struck Clara was how little the executives seemed to care about the damage they were causing. They treated their subordinates as if they were disposable, and they didn't even try to hide their arrogance. One afternoon, Clara was tasked with cleaning Mr. Thompson's office once again. This time, as she was dusting the shelves and wiping down his desk, she noticed something strange. There was a folder on his desk, and it was partially open. Clara was about to walk away, but something about the folder caught her eye. It was labeled with a project name she had heard mentioned before, a project that had been worked on by another team in the company. This was the same project that Mr. Thompson and his team had been planning to take credit for. Her heart raced as she carefully slid the folder closer. She knew it was a risk to go through it, but she couldn't ignore the chance to gather more evidence. With one eye on the door, Clara flipped the folder open, scanning the documents inside. What she found confirmed her worst fears. The papers contained emails, meeting notes, and plans for the project, all of which proved that Mr. Thompson and his team were planning to present someone else's work as their own. It was all there, in black and white. The deception was more blatant than she had imagined. Clara carefully closed the folder, her hands trembling slightly. She hadn't expected to find such concrete proof so easily, but now that she had it, she knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about office gossip anymore. It was about exposing the truth. Clara had worked in business strategy before, and she knew how to use information to her advantage. She understood the value of evidence, and she was holding on to something that could bring down the very people who had mocked her for so long. But Clara didn't act immediately. She knew that timing was everything. She had to be patient, gather even more proof if possible, and wait for the right moment to make her move. The thought of exposing the truth filled her with a quiet determination. No one had ever taken her seriously before, but Clara knew that the tables were about to turn. With the evidence in her hands, she now had the power to change everything. It was just a matter of when, and how, she would use it. As Clara left the office that day, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The pieces were falling into place, and soon the executives would have to face the consequences of their actions. For Clara, the quiet cleaning lady who had been laughed at for so long, the time for revenge was finally coming. But she wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking justice, and she was ready to make sure the truth was heard. Over the next few days, Clara's mind never left the discovery she had made in Mr. Thompson's office. The folder had revealed much more than she had expected, and with each passing moment, her resolve grew stronger. She now held the key to exposing the truth, proof that the CEO and his team were involved in a scheme to steal credit for work that wasn't theirs. It was a dangerous game, but Clara was determined to see it through. She wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. As she continued with her work, cleaning the offices and halls, Clara's thoughts remained sharp. Every time she wiped down a desk or mopped the floors, her mind was working overtime, strategizing the next steps. She needed to gather more evidence. One piece of information wasn't enough. Clara understood that the more proof she could collect, the stronger her position would be. But she had to be careful. The last thing she wanted was for her intentions to be discovered too soon. She started paying even closer attention to the small details. Clara began to notice things she had missed before. Quick conversations, stray comments, and careless words spoken by the executives. Every morning, she carefully observed the meetings taking place in the conference rooms. Although she had no access to the official documents, she made a mental note of every discussion that seemed important. She had a knack for remembering things, and the more she collected, the clearer the picture became. In the break room one afternoon, Clara overheard another conversation between two senior managers discussing an upcoming presentation to the board. It was another piece of the puzzle that made her feel even more certain of what she had to do. The presentation was supposed to highlight the success of the project that Mr. Thompson had stolen. The managers were already planning their strategy for presenting the work as if it were their own, completely ignoring the contributions of others. They spoke so freely about it, as if they were sure they wouldn't be caught. To them, it was just another day at the office. Clara could feel her anger rising. These people had no respect for anyone but themselves. But she quickly reminded herself that getting emotional wouldn't help. She needed to stay focused, keep her calm, and let the evidence speak for itself. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the situation wasn't just about taking credit for someone else's work. It was about the way they treated the people beneath them. The way they thought they could control everything, manipulate situations, and climb to the top by stepping on others. One evening, Clara stayed late, determined to make sure she had everything she needed. She slipped into the records room, where important company files were kept. It wasn't a place she had ever needed to go before, but now it was crucial. She scanned the shelves, looking for anything that might provide more concrete evidence of Mr. Thompson's actions. Her heart pounded as she found the folder she was looking for. one containing emails and memos about the project. Clara spent the next few hours going through the documents carefully, making sure she understood every detail. She felt like a detective piecing together a case, each new piece of evidence confirming her suspicions. The more she found, the more she realized that she had uncovered something much bigger than she had first thought. It wasn't just one project. It was a pattern of behavior. Mr. Thompson and his team had been manipulating things for years, taking credit for others' work, and ignoring the people who had truly earned it. By the time Clara left the office that night, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had gathered enough evidence to expose the truth. But she knew the next steps would require even more careful planning. There were still risks involved, and she couldn't afford to make a mistake. It was clear now that Clara wasn't just cleaning floors. She was cleaning up the mess these people had made. And the time to reveal the truth was fast approaching. Clara was ready. Clara knew that the next step in her plan had to be carried out carefully. She had gathered all the evidence she needed, but now came the most delicate part of her plan. Timing. This wasn't something she could rush. The executives, especially Mr. Thompson, were powerful people, and any misstep on her part could ruin everything. Clara was well aware that she was walking a fine line, but she also knew that she had one advantage they could never have predicted. She was invisible to them. They thought of her as nothing more than the quiet cleaning lady who swept their floors. But in reality, she had been watching, listening, and planning for weeks. Every morning, she entered the building as usual, carrying her cleaning supplies and going about her tasks as if nothing had changed. No one suspected that Clara, the woman who had always been seen as just a background figure in the office, was the one who had the power to bring their entire operation to its knees. Each time she walked through the hallways, she kept her head down, focusing on her work. She was a shadow, a quiet presence that went unnoticed by the people who should have been paying attention. And it was this very invisibility that gave her the chance to act without arousing suspicion. The other employees had started to notice a change in Clara. While she had always been polite, there was something different about her lately. Her movements were more purposeful, her gaze sharper. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words carried a certain weight. People could feel it, though no one dared to ask why she seemed so focused, so determined. They didn't know that Clara wasn't just cleaning anymore. She was setting the stage for a much larger action. The days went by, and Clara patiently waited for the right moment. The executives were busy with their usual meetings, and Mr. Thompson was wrapped up in his preparations for the upcoming board meeting, where he intended to present the stolen project as his own. Clara knew that the meeting was her opportunity. If she could expose Mr. Thompson in front of the board, in front of everyone who mattered, it would be impossible for him to wiggle out of the truth. The time to act was fast approaching, and Clara needed to make sure she was ready. One morning, as Clara was cleaning the executive floor, she overheard a conversation between two managers. They were discussing the final details of the presentation for the board, and Clara couldn't help but notice how confident they were. They had no idea that someone they had underestimated, was about to take everything from them. Clara listened closely, committing their words to memory. She knew the presentation would be the perfect opportunity to expose their lies. It was the moment she had been waiting for. Later that day, Clara did something she had never done before. She decided to approach one of the employees who had always been friendly to her. His name was James, and he worked in the IT department. Over the past few weeks, Clara had noticed that James was frustrated with the way the executives treated the lower-level staff, and she suspected that he might be sympathetic to her cause. As Clara approached him, she felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. This was a new step for her, but it was one that felt necessary. "James," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I need to talk to you about something important." James looked up, surprised. He had never seen Clara approach him outside of her cleaning duties. "Of course, Clara. What's on your mind?" Clara glanced around, making sure no one could overhear their conversation. "I've been noticing some things around here. Things I don't think are right." I need your help." James raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "What do you need?" Clara hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I've got information that could expose the CEO and his team, but I need someone I can trust to help me make it public. They can't get away with this." James was silent for a moment, processing what Clara had said. Finally, he nodded again, his expression serious. "You're not the only one who's noticed things. I'm with you, Clara. We'll do this together." With James's support, Clara felt a renewed sense of confidence. She wasn't alone in this anymore. She now had someone who understood and believed in what she was doing. Together, they would take the next steps, and the truth would finally come out. The time for waiting was over. Clara was ready to make her move. The day of the board meeting had arrived, and Clara could feel the tension building inside her. She had spent weeks gathering information, piecing together the lies and deceit of the CEO and his team. But now, the moment had finally come. She had everything she needed to expose them, and there was no turning back. Clara's heart was racing, but she was determined. She knew what she had to do, and she couldn't afford to hesitate now. As usual, Clara arrived at the office early to begin her cleaning duties. She moved through the building with a calm, focused air, though her mind was racing with thoughts of what was about to unfold. The staff around her were too busy with their own tasks to notice the change in her demeanor. No one could see the quiet storm brewing inside Clara. She had always been the invisible one, the one everyone overlooked, but now she was a woman on a mission, and she wasn't going to let anything stop her. The meeting would be held in the large boardroom on the top floor, a place where only the highest-ranking employees ever set foot. It was a place where important decisions were made, and where secrets were kept behind closed doors. Clara had worked in this building for years, and she knew the ins and outs of the layout like the back of her hand. As she moved closer to the boardroom, she could hear the sound of voices from inside. The executives were already gathering for the meeting, preparing to discuss the stolen project and present it as their own. Clara stopped for a moment outside the boardroom, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been working toward for so long. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew what she had to do. With one final glance around to make sure no one was watching, Clara slipped into the room unnoticed. Her movements were quick and deliberate, like a shadow, blending in with the quiet buzz of activity inside. The room was filled with the sound of conversation as the executives prepared for the presentation. Mr. Thompson, the CEO, stood at the front of the room, speaking with his colleagues in a tone of authority. He was confident, almost smug, as he spoke about the project that was about to make him and his team even richer. Clara's eyes narrowed as she watched him. He had no idea that his world was about to come crashing down. She quietly moved to the side, where a large projector screen displayed the details of the project that Mr. Thompson and his team were about to claim as their own. Clara couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. She had worked so hard to gather the evidence, and now she was going to make sure the truth was exposed. Her heart was racing, but she remained calm, waiting for the right moment to speak. As the meeting continued, Clara carefully positioned herself near the back of the room, out of sight from the others. She could hear Mr. Thompson's voice as he went over the details of the presentation, talking about the success of the project and how it would propel the company to new heights. The other executives nodded in agreement, completely unaware that the person who had done all the work was right in front of them. Clara's mind raced as she thought about the way they had treated her and the others. They had belittled people, taken credit for things they didn't deserve, and manipulated everyone around them for their own gain. But now, Clara was going to make sure they couldn't get away with it any longer. She knew the truth, and she wasn't going to let them continue their lies. With a sense of calm determination, Clara took the folder she had been carrying with her, a folder filled with the evidence of their wrongdoing, and stepped forward. She cleared her throat, and as the room fell silent, all eyes turned to her. The executives looked at her with surprise, not expecting her to speak up, much less interrupt the meeting. But Clara wasn't intimidated. She had come this far, And now it was time to reveal everything. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson," Clara said, her voice steady and firm. "I believe you owe the board and everyone in this room the truth." A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to Clara. The executives stared at her, their expressions a mix of confusion and surprise. But Clara wasn't backing down. She opened the folder and began to lay out the evidence, piece by piece. She told them everything: the conversations she had overheard, the emails she had found, and the truth about the project they were about to present as their own. As she spoke, Clara could see the shock and disbelief on their faces. They hadn't expected her to know so much, to have gathered so much evidence. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a sense of power. The truth was on her side, and there was no way they could deny it. She had done what no one thought possible. She had exposed them all. The room fell into a stunned silence as Clara finished presenting the evidence. The board members, who had been seated in their leather chairs with their attention fixed on the presentation, now turned their gaze toward her. Mr. Thompson stood frozen at the front, his face drained of color. The smug confidence he had entered the room with was completely gone, replaced by shock and disbelief. Clara could feel the weight of the moment in the stillness, and she knew the impact of what she had just revealed would be far-reaching. One of the senior managers, Richard, was the first to speak, but his voice was shaky. This can't be true. How did you get this information?" He looked from the documents in Clara's hands to the rest of the board, his eyes wide with panic. The other executives were similarly flustered, whispering among themselves, trying to come to terms with the revelation. Clara's expression remained calm, her voice steady as she responded. "It's all here. The emails, the meeting notes, the project plans, everything you've been hiding." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I've been listening, observing, and gathering what I needed. You underestimated me, and now the truth is out." Mr. Thompson, still speechless, seemed to struggle to regain his composure. He took a few steps forward, but instead of the authoritative figure the board had come to expect, he now seemed small and unsure. This isn't how it looks. There must be some misunderstanding," he stammered, clearly trying to salvage something from the situation. But Clara could see it in his eyes. He knew there was no way out. The evidence was too solid. The board members exchanged glances, clearly processing what Clara had just revealed. One of them, an older woman named Linda, finally spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Thompson, this is a serious accusation. If what Clara is saying is true, you and your team have been committing fraud. You've stolen intellectual property, taken credit for work that wasn't yours, and manipulated your way to the top. This cannot be ignored." Clara stood there, unwavering, as the board members continued to debate among themselves. She had no intention of backing down. She wasn't just seeking to ruin Mr. Thompson's career. She was exposing the culture of dishonesty and greed that had thrived within the company for far too long. The people at the top had been given far too much power, and now it was time for the truth to surface. As the conversation grew more heated, Clara could feel the tide turning. One by one, the board members began to voice their concerns, expressing disbelief at what had been happening under their noses. The executives who had been complicit in Mr. Thompson's actions were no longer so confident. They could see their careers slipping away, their positions of power crumbling as the truth came to light. After what felt like an eternity, the board chairwoman, Linda, stood up and turned to Mr. Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, I think it's clear that your leadership is no longer tenable. You've lied to this board, and you've misled the entire company. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as CEO." She paused, glancing at the other executives. "And I expect a full investigation into the activities of everyone involved." The room was silent again, but this time, the silence was different. It wasn't filled with uncertainty or fear. It was filled with a sense of justice being served. Mr. Thompson, his face flushed with anger and shame, opened his mouth to protest, but Linda held up a hand. signaling that he had no room left to speak. Clara, still standing at the back of the room, couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. She had done it. She had exposed the lies, the deceit, and the arrogance that had ruled the company for so long. No one had believed in her before. No one had thought a simple cleaning lady could ever take down someone like Mr. Thompson. But now, the truth was undeniable, and Clara had played a pivotal role in making sure it was heard. As the board members continued to discuss the next steps, Clara quietly made her way to the door. She had achieved what she set out to do. The weight that had been on her shoulders for weeks seemed to lift, and she could feel a quiet sense of triumph wash over her. She didn't need anyone to thank her. She didn't need the applause or the recognition. Clara knew that the real victory was in the change she had sparked, the justice she had fought for. She had done it all on her own, without anyone's help or approval, and now the company would have to face the consequences of its actions. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the hallway as she walked out of the boardroom, her heart still pounding, but with a new sense of freedom. Clara had taken down the powerful and exposed the truth. In the end, it wasn't the title or the office that mattered. The next few days after the board meeting were a whirlwind of activity, and Clara could hardly believe everything that had unfolded. The company had initiated a full investigation into the CEO, Mr. Thompson, and the executives involved in the deceit. His removal from the position of CEO had been swift, and the ripple effects were felt throughout the building. What had once been an office full of smug, overconfident leaders was now a place of uncertainty. Those who had been complicit in the scheme were now facing questions about their own actions. But for Clara, the immediate change wasn't the most important part. It was the fact that justice had finally been served. She had watched as people who had mocked her for so long suddenly looked at her with a new respect, even though they never openly acknowledged it. To Clara, the satisfaction didn't come from their recognition. It came from knowing that she had done what was right, even when everyone else was too afraid to challenge the system. The days that followed were filled with a mix of nervous tension and eager anticipation. The investigation into the fraudulent activities was moving quickly, and there were murmurs in the building about the potential for criminal charges. Clara knew that the company was going to be changed forever, but she also knew that it wasn't just about the big names who would fall. It was about the culture that had allowed such things to happen in the first place. People would never look at the company the same way again. Despite all that had happened, Clara returned to her usual tasks, quietly cleaning the offices as she always had. But there was something different now. There was a sense of pride in her step, and a subtle confidence that had never been there before. She had proven that one person could make a difference, no matter how small or invisible they seemed. One morning, as Clara was cleaning the lobby, Linda, the chairwoman of the board, approached her. Clara had noticed Linda a few times in the days since the meeting, but she never thought she would speak to her directly. Linda was a high-ranking figure in the company, someone who had the power to change things. But now, standing in front of Clara, Linda seemed just as human as anyone else. "Clara, can I speak with you for a moment?" Linda asked, her voice kind and warm. Clara looked up, surprised. She had never expected someone like Linda to take notice of her. "Of course," Clara replied, setting down her cleaning supplies and wiping her hands on her apron. Linda smiled softly and motioned for Clara to walk with her. "I just wanted to thank you. What you did, it was courageous, and it's not something that goes unnoticed." Clara was taken aback by the praise. "I didn't do it for thanks," she said, her voice steady. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." "I understand that," Linda said with a nod. "But still, your actions have made a difference. You've changed this company, Clara. I want you to know that." Clara felt a mix of emotions as she listened. She wasn't used to being praised, especially not for something like this. She had always been the one who stayed in the background, unnoticed by most. But now, for the first time, Clara felt like her actions had truly mattered. Linda continued, "We're in the process of reviewing the company's culture, and we'd like you to be a part of the conversation moving forward. You have a perspective that we need to hear." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected such an offer. She had always been seen as just the cleaning lady, but now it seemed like people were starting to realize her value. "I'm honored," Clara said, her voice filled with quiet humility. "I'd be happy to help in any way I can." As the days went by, Clara's life began to change in ways she hadn't imagined. The respect she had earned within the company grew. People, especially those who had once looked down on her, now treated her differently. They realized that Clara wasn't just someone who cleaned the offices. She was someone with integrity, intelligence, and courage. She had shown them that standing up for what was right wasn't just about having a title or position. It was about having the strength to act when no one else would. Eventually, the investigation concluded, and several top executives, including Mr. Thompson, were held accountable for their actions. Clara didn't seek any rewards or recognition for what she had done. She didn't need a promotion or a special title. For her, the real reward was knowing that the truth had come to light, and that she had played a key role in bringing about the change the company needed. Clara continued to work in the building, but now she held a different kind of power. She was no longer the unnoticed woman in the background. She was someone whose actions had reshaped the entire company. Her quiet strength had